Hello?
It's me. Don't change your expression.
What?
Pat found Alan's letter.
What?
He found one of Alan's love letters. He came by the salon this morning to make sure that the affair's really over. And he made me promise not to tell you that he knows.
So this is me not telling you that he knows.
I'll call you later, okay?
Okay, I'm so sorry.
Okay. Bye.
Welcome back to the official Love and Death podcast. Here we are in episode 3, where we find Candy feeling rejected after the end of her affair with Alan. So where does a Texas lady in the late 70s turn to feel better? For Candy, it's 2 places. With her best friend, Sherry Kleckler, and from the disco hits blasting from her car radio. We'll speak with Christian Ritter, who plays Sherry in the series, a little later in the podcast. We'll also talk true crime and the Texas Woman with Texas Monthly editor Mimi Schwartz. But right now, let's turn the beat around and hear from composer Jeff Russo on how he created a sense of time and place with music across the 7-episode series. Jeff Russo, Emmy-winning composer who is behind the music in this series. Welcome to the Love and Death Companion podcast.
I'm very excited to be here.
So here we have an interesting potential dilemma for a composer. You've got a small town of Wiley, Texas, but you have a big, nasty murder that's going to happen somewhere along the way. So let's talk about how you think about a story to inform this type of scale.
You know, this particular story posed a really interesting way to look at things with its duplicity in Candy's character, right? It was almost like having to play her own sense of self and the outside world's sense of Candy's self, right? And then I had to also play, well, what really happened? And it sort of unfolds across the series. We talked about how to approach the score. I talked about it with Leslie and I talked about it with David, about how to approach the score in a way that didn't give it all away and still created this sense of unease. Now, I actually was brought in a little late in the process. And because of that, they were able to send me all of the episodes at once. And I sat one day and watched all 7 episodes to really see how it played. And that was a very interesting thing for me because I don't really typically get to experience a narrative that way in episodic television.
Are you getting a script from, David Kelley does he even say, I'd love to have music here? Or are they saying to you, here's the show. Can you put some music in this moment?
Generally speaking, they called me and they were like, we want to know and want to hear what you think is the right way to go here. And, I tend to like to write music from the perspective of what a character is feeling, not what a character is doing. That's why this was such an interesting case, because you really do get into Candy's unconscious mind. Like, you really dig, I had the opportunity to really dig down deep into what she was feeling and what the other characters were feeling. I did very little in the way of like scoring a moment for what you're seeing on the screen. I did very little of that.
And I mean, this is getting to the root of what everyone was trying to figure out with Candy Montgomery and the case, right? Like, what is she thinking? Who is this person? Who's this person I thought I knew?
As I watched the entire series, I, as a viewer, sort of went through a number of different waves of feeling. You start really sympathizing, and then you understand the path that she's taking. And then there's a moment where you're like, oh, wait a second. No, that's evil. There's something evil lurking underneath.
And in a series like this, where the characters have such a hard time conveying or even understanding their own emotions, music is so critical. So there's a scene where Betty is looking out the window and seeing for the first time that there might be something going on with her husband and Candy. It's like a light bulb moment. And it feels like what you're bringing with music, for us, the viewers, is an emotional register that maybe the characters aren't even aware of yet.
That's great. I thank you for recognizing that. You know, one of the things that I think composers are tasked with doing is playing the emotional truth of characters. And in these moments, what we're meant to do is reveal that truth to the viewer, knowing that the truth is not being revealed to the other characters. It's like, how do I expose the inner workings of the character and what the character's feeling at that moment? And you're totally right. She might have been looking out the window and thinking like, where the hell's my mail? Because I'm expecting the phone bill or whatever, right?
Right.
Or she notices Candy and she has that one brief moment of clarity. And I latch on to that. And it's the same with the letters, obviously. But with the letters, what you realize is it's less about what he is realizing, right? It's less about the fact that he's reading this letter and he's getting truth, but it is more about like, well, what is it doing to him?
Yeah, right.
He becomes torn at that moment, like I think any man who basically finds out that his wife is cheating on him, and not just cheating, but feeling like this is an actual love affair.
How do you know what to use?
It's like my feeling around a room in the dark. I really am like trying to find it as I'm creating it. Like I don't have an affair button, like I don't have a murder button, like boom, boom. Like, I try to find something melodically or something that will pull on a person's empathy. One of the things a composer I think is most, a composer's most useful tool is empathy, right? So I can put myself in the character's shoes and like wonder, how do I feel in this situation? How does this make me feel?
Well, at the end of this episode, I don't know if this is just me reducing it to the sound that I picked up on, but the last few seconds of this episode, it sounds like a ticking time bomb.
Betty. Betty.
It's Betty who goes and grabs the axe, at least in this telling of the end of the story. Here, we've got a very quiet maneuver between these two women in a suburban home. And I was like, is he giving us like a clock sound? What is that you created there?
It's interesting that you pick up on that. It actually is the sound of a ticking clock. And the idea here was, what's happening with time at this moment? Because I kind of feel like time slows down when this kind of thing is going on. I think Candy is picking up on Betty's distress. That's the idea. Like she's waiting for her in that room.
And then you really just see, it's a beautiful shot. It's Betty sort of standing with the axe. Like, so we haven't moved. It's just this moment suspended. All right. So here we are in the late 70s and we're going into 1980. And we are in an era of the soundtrack. And it is all over this series. Grease. Saturday Night Fever, and of course, Star Wars. John Williams, extraordinaire, defined the surge of these big soundtracks for us that we kind of take for granted now. When you were working and thinking about this series, were you like delighted to be able to revisit this era? Does that have any influence on you as an artist or any thoughts there?
Well, most of the songs you hear, not even most, every one of the songs that we used in the show is from my young childhood, right? I grew up in the 70s and in the 80s, and all of those, so every time a song would play, I'd be like, oh my God, this was my favorite song. You know, just hearing all this music it was definitely sort of an emotional, nostalgic roller coaster ride for me, and you know that definitely had me feeling what I was feeling as I was watching it. And it's interesting because Candy, you know, was still a young adult, right? Like,
Yes.
so still having a lot to be guided by music.
Again, I think it's maybe an important distinction that we're not just, you know, two Gen Xers being nostalgic. In the show, it's highly effective for us to understand that Candy casts so widely to sort of understand how she's feeling or to connect with something that when Turn the Beat Around comes on, it fills her up. It gives her this emotional charge, and I think that that's so essential in understanding both the character and then the era that she's in, and then of course the way that David Kelly writes it, and
Yes.
So there's enormous value in understanding that.
Also,
You know?
nothing wrong with being a Gen Xer or being nostalgic about music.
Which gets me to a really important cultural reference that's a little earlier. It's 1971. It's Carole King, one of the best songwriters and singers of all time. And Tapestry, Candy talks about Tapestry and how, and it's, you know, Candy and Pat are at Marriage Encounter, and he quotes a song back to her that's a Carole King song that he's trying to sort of pass off as his, you know, type of poetry and affection. But he says that because Carole King speaks to Candy's heart. And you know, Candy even quotes the lyrics from Tapestry.
The song Tapestry by Carole King. Yeah, I've listened to it a zillion times, and I still have no idea what it's about, but it speaks to me just the same. My life has been a tapestry of rich and royal hue, a wondrous woven magic. Now, I haven't a clue what she's talking about, but I want it.
I understand you did the score for the show, but just this, like, seeing Candy and how she looks at music so deeply that a Carole King song can define how she tells her husband the way that she wants her life to be.
Well, you know, I've always been a believer that songs are so connected to people because they sometimes give voice to feelings that you can't understand, and that you don't understand. You know, Carole King speaks to your heart, you know, and for those lyrics to really connect with Candy, and then for her husband to use that in order to try to connect to her was really like an emotional moment for me just in watching the show. And I was sort of like really like, oh yeah, David Kelly, he knows exactly how to say that and how that all works. It was really, really interesting to me.
As we move forward in the series, the stakes are getting higher for certain characters. Are there moments of music we should pay close attention to?
You know, the first 3 episodes were way more emotional in terms of the score that I was writing, and then in 4 we do pivot to something a lot more thriller-esque because it really does change tone, like what you see that happens and then its fallout. So as it becomes a thriller, the score gets more tense. It doesn't get less subtle, though. And, you know, one of the things we talked about early on with this score and this storytelling technique was how do we do it in a thoughtful yet subtle way that is not over the top? Because, you know, Candy is an over-the-top character that is not being played as an over-the-top character, which to me is what makes Liz Olsen's performance so nuanced and so great, is that it's this character that could simply be huge, but she plays it with a measuredness that makes it really more tense. So I wanted to sort of do the same thing with the score. It's like how can I be this thriller and have all this tension, but not be loud and over the top? And I looked a lot to the performances because they were all sort of like that. They're all really layered and really complex, but not like screaming from the rooftops, which this could have very easily been done that way. And I wanted to sort of follow that track with the score. So the score does take a shift in 4. But it takes a shift in a way that I think is not necessarily what you would expect. It doesn't get big and ominous, but it gets a little more sly and a little more like you don't know what is coming next.
Jeff Russo, thank you so much for joining us. And I think listeners will be delighted to be able to tune into the next layer of the storytelling. And Jeff, I'm ready for you for the Gen X Nostalgia Radio Hour.
Let's do it. I would love to do that. Oh my gosh, that sounds like so much fun. Yep.
All right, to be continued.
Yep.
In her television roles, Krysten Ritter is no stranger to the dark side. But as Candy Montgomery's best friend Sherry, she brings levity to the drama. Here to talk about Sherry's loyalty to Candy and just how far that friendship will go is Krysten Ritter.
So Krysten Ritter, welcome to the companion podcast to Love and Death.
Thank you so much for having me.
So here we are. It's episode 3. And your character, Sherry Kleckler, is Candy's best friend. And we are going to really see her rise to the occasion as a friend in this episode. But let's start with Sherry as a character. When we see her, she doesn't look like a lot of the other women in Wiley, Texas. She doesn't act like a lot of the other women in Wiley, Texas. So what can you tell us about Sherry and her backstory as a character?
Yeah, so Sherry Kleckler is the sort of town beautician. And, I think that really sets her apart from the other people in the church community. She's really got her own thing going on. When you're a beautician, the currency often is gossip. When you're sitting in the chair getting your hair done, people reveal a lot about themselves. There's just something about it.
Yeah.
So Sherry has kind of a big, colorful life, and she has a sort of bubbly energy. She's a little light on her feet, a little sassy. And I think what ultimately, at first connects Candy and Sherry is the gossipy fun stuff, but then their friendship is obviously grows and becomes very deepened and transforms into a safe space to share information, sort of judgment-free. Sherry's a really good friend to Candy.
Yes.
And they have a really fun dynamic. I think that Candy looks up to Sherry a little bit because Sherry does have her own business. And she has a kind of successful relationship with her husband. She's got her own thing going on. She isn't sort of the well-kept, at-home woman that a lot of the other characters, are in this time and in this setting and in this story. Sherry's doing the thing. And I think that makes her kind of fun. She's very different in the show, right? The character's a little bit of a breath of fresh air when she comes on screen. And I think Candy really, it gravitates towards her because of that.
Yeah, and there is this great scene in Candy's kitchen in this episode where Sherry is there. They probably just made a pot of coffee. It's the morning, but her hair is perfectly coiffed. She's got the makeup, and they're deciding to get the idea to start their own business. And Sherry's got this great line that you say where she says, "There's a lot of people in Wiley looking to remake their lives, but would settle for a spiffier breakfast nook."
Yes, you're right. It's the morning time, and she is dulled to the nines. I think there's one scene in the whole show where we see her in her rollers and in her robe, but she is always putting her best face forward, putting her best foot forward. She's very proactive, and she's a real go-getter. And I think that comes across in her appearance and in her sort of can-do attitude. If we don't feel good, let's do something about it. And I think that she's kind of trying to drag Candy out of her own head and out of this funk that she's in by starting their own business. Why not? Let's not talk about it. Let's do it.
Yeah, and she seems to understand what Wiley's all about when people try to come there to remake their own lives. Now, people pursue that in different ways. And Candy seems to do it through an affair with Alan Gore. And what surprises me, and I think other viewers when we watch the show, is that Sherry's not judgmental about it. She's actually enjoying this experience and the stories and the gossip about it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how you approached this character and her openness to Candy and what she wants to do with her life?
She is a bit more outrageous, a bit more progressive, a bit more like living her full life than maybe some of the other more, measured, sheltered, playing by the rules characters in the story and in the setting. So I think, that's part of the fun of the character. And so when Candy, brings to the table that she's interested in having an affair, I think that's fun. And I think Sherry relates to that. I think it's salacious and fun. And, they're women of the same age, same place in their lives, their kids the same age. Like, yeah, why not? Where everybody else is kind of judgmental. And, oh my gosh, you could never do that. Don't even speak those words.
Right.
Sherry's like, yeah, it's okay. Let's express ourselves. Let's talk about it. There's no judgment in a close female friendship like that. They encourage each other. And even though it's like a bit naughty what she's doing, she gives Candy the safe space to express how she's actually feeling.
Were you surprised or even sort of like enjoying the candidness of these two women, there at a diner talking all this stuff out in 1979?
Yes, absolutely. And obviously, I live in modern times, so I don't blush over that stuff, but I did enjoy that was in the script. And there's one thing, listen, there's just something about David E. Kelley. He is such, he's one of the most important and prolific writers of our lifetime, and just a master writer. And the way that he writes women and is able to get into their head is just so amazing. Everybody has a thing, everybody has a voice. It's like his style of writing is kind of mind blowing. I loved all that stuff. And it was exciting to see, especially for women's. You're right. It was 1979 until early 80s.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And
the show is set.
Mm-hmm. It's 78 to 80.
But I really enjoyed those moments because the story got to breathe. That's what David does so well. The suspense is there, the story is there, the plot is there. You can't look away. But then we always have a lot of quiet moments for character.
Yeah.
And that's what. Those are fun. And that's what people love that. People, when you fall in love with characters as an audience member, I love watching those just conversations that aren't just moving story forward, aren't just plot. And I think that's what David does so beautifully. He's just such a master writer, and he's a master writer writing women. He's really somebody I admire and adore and look up to.
What was your sense of what a small town in Texas and what women's lives might be like in real life? And then what was it like compared to when you were shooting the show and as you understood the characters better?
I had the best time. I mean, I got to say, I have a unique experience that is my own of shooting this show because I have a supporting role. I went and moved to Texas with my son, who was 2. And we had just the most magical experience in Texas making this show. And it was kind of as a mother, you're trying to figure out the balance. I still like to work and have my big fancy career, but mothering is way more important to me than I ever imagined it would be. And so this was a really successful, fun, beautiful, positive experience that I had. Not only because the cast is A team. Everybody got along really well. I actually know Lily from 20 years ago.
I was Mona Lisa Smile. I think you guys were they were saying Lily Rabe and Jesse Plemons. We were obviously talking about, you guys go way back with Lily.
Way back. And that had a lot to do with wanting to go be a part of it as well. I'd always heard wonderful things about Lizzie, Elizabeth Olsen. which all are true. I've always looked up to and admired Leslie Linka Glatter and had wanted to work with her. Obviously, when David E. Kelley calls, you say yes. And it was just this amazing, team put together. And then I ended up like making really good friends on the show. And that, you always hear actors talking about how like everybody's in love with each other. And then when rap happens, like you go your separate ways and maybe you don't see them until it's down the road. But I've made like real friends on this show that I still talk to every single day.
Wow,
and
really?
it's sort of similar with Jessica Jones. Like sometimes there's just these jobs where it's lightning in a bottle. Everybody like connects and you like make lifelong friendships. And I had that experience on this. And I had my boy with me.
Now, does that chemistry carry over? I mean, you guys are professional actors, but does it carry over when we're watching the show between Kandi and Sherry? How does that play out?
I believe so because I really do like love and adore Lizzie. And her schedule was, challenging. She's in every scene and I've been there and I really wanted to like support her and lift her up, and I care about her and Sherry cares about Kandi. And I absolutely think that shows and that absolutely transfers over to the screen. And when that happens, it's magic and you get so lucky. So I think that adds an element. I mean, I just loved the days where I'm like on set with Lizzie all day. She's so smart. She's so good. She works so hard. She's very fierce and fabulous and graceful. And I really adore her.
Something that she said that I found so fascinating when I interviewed her was I always love hearing about the inspirations sometimes in building a character. Some people do it, some people don't. But she had mentioned like Hillary Clinton as one of her influences.
I love that.
In that drive, right? What I love about Sherry's character is she's so vivacious and colorful. Did you draw from any particular inspiration to play her?
Let me tell you, I am playing my Aunt Sharon. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and I went to church on Sundays, the Benton Christian Church. I sang in the choir. My Aunt Sharon sang big in the choir. She was very, very active in the church. She was the choir leader for a while. She did Sunday school. She was a beautician. She worked out of her house. She was always in purple. She was always in blue eyeshadow. She always had big hair. And she just had this way about her, and the way that she walked and the way that she carried her body and the way that she when I'm walking as Sherry, it's a little like small steps. My hands are up. It's a little like, I kind of built that character playing in my Aunt Sharon. And when I first had meetings with hair and with wardrobe, I had pictures of my Aunt Sharon in her choir robe. And it felt like it was an ode to her. I was playing my Aunt Sharon 100%. And the fact that the character's name was Sherry too.
Yes.
And I would be texting her about it and she was just tickled pink.
Oh, I can't wait for her to see the show, right?
I know, me too. She can't wait. I think she's more excited about this than, she's very into all the things that I do. But I know she's very excited about this. I can't wait to tell everybody that I'm playing her, essentially, But she was definitely, I had a fun inspiration. And I think that's what stuck out to me when I first read the script. I was like, okay, I have a little idea here. And I kind of always build my characters first with like getting in the body. I make it physical for myself. What's the physicality? What does the walk look like? Like I could do like a little show for you right now and walk like every character I've ever played. And they're going to be a little bit different. And there was just something about this like Sherry thing that I tapped into. And I was like, you know what? I think I could make this fun for myself and make this like, kind of light and easy, and maybe this is like the perfect thing to do while my son is an itty bitty baby, because you never get that time back.
You mentioned Jessica Jones, and they're different characters, but something that seems to be true about both of those characters and other characters that you've played is that no matter what, they're sort of fiercely loyal. They're loyal to a person or to the integrity of a friendship. And in this episode, Pat finds out about the affair by going to Sherry and asking her to tell him the truth.
It's been over for a long time.
I want to talk to Candy about this in my own way. I don't want you to tell her that I talked to you. Promise me I can talk to her first.
I promise. I promise.
Yes, actually, that scene was one of my favorite scenes. Kind of when I was sent the first couple of scripts, I was really excited to work with Patrick Fugit, who's so wonderful in the show and so funny.
Oh, yes.
Playing that contrast and that conflict and like trying to balance both worlds in that moment, because these people are all in each other's lives. She's known Pat, she sees Pat all the time, like having to lie but still love him and sort of carry all of that in that moment. Like that's like, I think as soon as she feels him coming in the door, it's like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Trying to cover for your friend in that way. But at the end of the day, the loyalty's to Candy. So even though she says like, with no irony and no sarcasm, I will absolutely not tell her. Cut to 2 seconds later. She's like, this is me telling you, don't change your face. Like, here's what's going on. I gotta warn you right away.
And I wondered if, Sherry's words didn't help influence Pat in some way in recognizing that he actually has something good with Candy and she made a mistake. And so it's not just protecting for her friend.
Yeah, people make mistakes. And I think that Sherry is a good voice there. She's very mature. She's very pragmatic about it. She's very empathetic. And she tells him, like, listen, she made a mistake, or you guys can come back from this. She's a good friend. She's a good mother. She's a good wife. You guys can get through this. And I think Sherry hopes that would happen for them.
So in the coming episodes, we'll see Candy's life unravel and the lies pile up. And so without revealing too much about what happens, will we see Sherry's loyalty tested? How far will Sherry go for Candy?
I think, Sherry stands by her. Sherry gives her safety and loyalty to the end. She's the one who she can trust 100%. She is actually the one watching the kids during all of the trial. She's protecting the kids. We had to pick moments where there's some ambiguity about whether or not Sherry believes her or not, or is able to even wrap her head around her friend being capable of something like this. But she stands by her. She's the only person really that 100% stands by her.
And furthermore, defends her character to others. So there's something about being a friend to someone when you're with that friend. But we'll see in future episodes just how she's the ride or die. Like, she will defend her, particularly because it seems like people are really consumed by Candy's affairs. Did you when you were reading the script and understanding the story, did you feel like there was extra attention paid to Candy's sex life and personal life that went beyond the actual violent incident that takes place?
Yeah, I think this is big news. This is big news in a small town like that, and everybody's talking. Not a lot happens. Certainly not like salacious sort of. This is a big deal, and I think everybody in town is talking, and it's hard for Sherry. When she walks into the diner, everyone's talking, everyone's looking at Sherry. I think that's really challenging. It's really alienating. I think Sherry will still fight for her to the death, and but it rocks everybody's world, right? I think it rocks everybody.
So do you feel, through Sherry, a sympathy for Candy that others might not feel, having played her best friend?
Oh yeah, I think so, and I think the beauty of having a real life connection with Lizzie outside of it and off screen, and me feeling like I want to support her and help her and be there for her, whatever she needs, working long hours. What can we do to help you? What can we do to like make this day easier for you? I think all of that you bring to the screen, and I think every character I've ever played has a little bit of me in it, different sides. I mean, obviously I kind of go back and forth between like very, very, very dark
Yep.
dramas and then like sort of lighter comedies. But you always find a piece of yourself to bring. And I think, that sort of modern flair, doing her own thing, marching to her own drum with Sherry is absolutely something that is very Kristen as well.
Well, shout out to you and to Aunt Sharon for an incredible performance. And we're so looking forward to seeing what happens next in the series. Thank you so much for your time. Kristen Ritter, it's been great having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, in this episode's Only in Texas segment, I'm here to talk about the iconic image of the Texas woman with Mimi Schwartz, award-winning executive editor at Texas Monthly. She writes about women's issues, Texas politics, and true crime, sometimes all three. Okay, so Mimi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Let's travel back in time to the 1970s and early 80s. What's life for women like Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore? Young, white, middle-class mothers and wives to engineers in Silicon Prairie.
Well, I think, it wouldn't be like the TV show Dallas. It wouldn't be glamorous. It would still be a place, though, where physical beauty was incredibly important. Especially, these Texas cities are all different from each other, but Dallas is the most wedded to appearances. And I think everyone there, or as many women as possible, absorbed those lessons and thought, God, your hair had to be perfect, your makeup had to be perfect, your dress had to be perfect, your heels. So there was, it would seem a little oppressive to me.
Yeah, sure.
But there were rules, and you had to follow them if you wanted to be considered attractive.
When you think about the iconic Texas woman, I think of Governor Ann Richards and Texas Observer columnist Molly Ivins. I'll even think of, Sue Ellen Ewing, like these women who don't take any shit from anybody. But it seems like when we're looking, and even in Candy's story, Candy's a very strong female presence. How do we understand the identity of this Texas woman within the context of what sounds like, from what you're saying, is this patriarchal culture?
Well, I think, as funny and entertaining as Ann Richards was and Molly Ivins was, those things came at a very high cost. Both Ann and Molly had to deal with alcohol problems. I think there were enormous pressures on them to always be entertaining and always be funny, which, and Ann Richards in particular, when you look at her early married life, she was always giving parties. She always had to be the life of the party and make everybody else happy. And I think, we think of them as sort of being the way they were naturally, and I'm not sure that's exactly right. I think those were performances, and they felt incredibly pressured to perform. So, not that they weren't incredibly unique and incredibly talented, but I think there was a cost that people here don't think about.
Right.
When I was growing up, you could be like a Farrah Fawcett, or you could be a Molly Ivins. There wasn't, they were sort of two different paths that, it wasn't necessarily a choice. You had to kind of pick, because you could be smart and funny, or you could be beautiful and kind of quiet and submissive. And so I think it's only in more recent times that you're seeing sort of, oh, well, now we can be both, or we can be neither, or whatever.
As I'm listening to you, Mimi, again, and knowing the incredible amount of work you've done on women's issues, I'm hearing a sense of fatigue, or maybe it's defeat, in your voice as we're talking about this.
I think, for generations, Texas women have picked up after Texas men and the messes they make. And I think what you're hearing in my voice is, oh my God, we have to do this again. That somehow, we're back. We've been set back 50 years at, maybe at the least. And I was a child during the years when Texas was just as backward as everybody thinks it is. And real strides were made, and they were made in important things like education. But I sound tired because I am tired.
Mimi, what's that famous quote that Ann Richards has about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers?
Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, only backwards and in high heels. And that's, it's true.
Mimi, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, having your perspective on Texas culture, Texas women, the fiction versus the reality, both in the series and in real life, has been eye-opening, to say the least. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Nancy. It was great to see you again.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll be back for the 4th episode out May 4th. See you then. The official Love and Death podcast is an HBO Max production in partnership with Texas Monthly Studio, the in-house agency for Texas Monthly. Our executive producers are Maddie Builder and Aaron Kubatsky. The podcast is written, produced, and hosted by me, Nancy Miller. Brian Standifer is our audio engineer, editor, and mixer. Music is courtesy of Warner Media, HBO Max, and Brian Standifer. Watch Love and Death now on HBO Max.